Brothers and sisters, Assalamu alaikum. Welcome everybody to the program of the birth of our fifth Imam, Imam Muhammad Baqir alayhi salam. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. And congratulations to everybody on the first of Rajab, inshallah. Lots of many bounties and prayers and blessings and du'as and amals occur tonight and tomorrow. So please do remember all of us in your amals and du'as. We'll start the program tonight with the recitation of the Holy Quran by Zoya and Laila Nathani. So I'll turn it over right now. I'm not sure if both of you or one of you are doing it, but please, whenever you're ready, we'll start, inshallah.
Assalamu alaikum. My name is Laila. I will be doing Surah Al-Masad. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم تبت يدا أبي لهب وتب ما أغنى عنه ماله وما كسب سيصلى نارا ذات لهب وامرأته حمالة الحطب في جيدها حبل من مسد. Surah Al-Masad. In the name of Allah, the entirely merciful, the especially merciful. May the hands of Abu Lahab be ruined, and ruined is he. His wealth will not avail him, or that which he gained. He will enter to burn in a fire of blazing flame, and his wife as well, the carrier of firewood. Around her neck is a rope of twisted fiber.
Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad.
Assalamu alaikum. I'm Zoya, and I will be reciting Surah Al-Nasr. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم إذا جاء نصر الله والفتح ورأيت الناس يدخلون في دين الله أفواجا فسبح بحمد ربك واستغفره إنه كان توابا. Surah Al-Nasr. In the name of Allah, the entirely merciful, the especially merciful. When the victory of Allah has come and the conquest, and you see the people entering into the religion of Allah in multitudes, then exalt him with praise of your Lord and ask for forgiveness of him. Indeed, he is ever accepting of repentance.
Muhammad. Good job, Zoya and Laila, mashallah. You guys did such a good job. Great job, mashallah. Keep it up, and we want to keep hearing from both of you, inshallah. Great job. Okay, we'll now proceed with Hadith Kisa to Uncle Murtaza Khaku, please. Uncle Murtaza, whenever you're ready.
Bar Muhammad wa ali Muhammad salawat.
Muhammad.
Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. عن جابر بن عبد الله الأنصاري عن فاطمة الزهراء عليه السلام بنت رسول الله صلى الله عليه وآله قال سمعت فاطمة عنها قالت دخل علي برسول الله في بعض الأيام فقال السلام عليك يا فاطمة فقلت عليك السلام قال إني أجد في بدني ضعفا فقلت له أعوذك بالله عبث من الذوق فقال يا فاطمة ائتيني بالكساء اليماني فأتيني به فأتيته بالكساء اليماني فأتيت به وصرت أنظر إليه وإذا وجهه يتله كأنه البدر في ليلة تمامه وكماله اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد فما كانت إلا ساعة إذا بولد الحسن قد أقبل فقال السلام عليك يا أمة فقلت عليك السلام يا قرة عيني وثمرة فؤادي فقال يا أمة إن شمدك راية طيبة كان راية جد رسول الله صلى الله عليه وآله فقلت نعم إن جدك تحت الكساء فأقبل الحسن نحو الكساء وقال السلام عليك يا جدا يا رسول الله أتاذن أن أدخل معك تحت الكساء فقال وعليك السلام يا ولدي ويا صاحب حوزي قد أذنت لك فدخل معه تحت الكساء اللهم صل على محمد وآل فما كانت إلا ساعة إذا بولد الحسين قد أقبل وقال السلام عليك يا أمة فقلت وعليك السلام يا ولدي ويا قرة عيني وثمرة فؤادي فقال لي يا أمة إن شمدك راية طيبة كأنها راية جدي رسول الله صلى الله عليه وآله فقلت نعم إن جدك وأخاك تحت الكساء فدنا الحسين نحو الكساء وقال السلام عليك يا جدة السلام عليك يا من اختار الله أتعزني أن أكون معكم تحت الكساء فقال وعليك السلام يا ولدي ويا شافي أمتك قد أزيد لك فدخل معهما تحت الكساء اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد فأقبل عند ذلك أبو الحسن علي بن أبي طالب وقال السلام عليك يا بنت رسول الله فقلت نعم وعليك السلام يا أبا الحسن ويا أمير المؤمنين فقال يا فاطمة إني أشم لك راهية طيبة كان راهية أخي وابن عمي رسول الله صلى الله عليه وآله فقلت نعم ها هو ما والديك تحت الكساء فأقبل علي نحو الكساء وقال السلام عليك يا رسول الله أتأذنني أن أكون معكم تحت الكساء قال له عليك السلام يا أخي ويا وسي وخليفتي وصاحب لواء قد أذنت لك فدخل علي تحت الكساء اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد ثم أتيت نحو الكساء وقلت السلام عليك يا أبتا يا رسول الله أتأذنني أن أكون معكم تحت الكساء قال وعليك السلام يا بنتي ويا بزعتي قد أذنت لك فدخلت تحت الكساء اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد فلما اكتملنا جميعا تحت الكساء أخذ برسول الله بطرف الكساء وما بيد اليمنى إلى السماء وقال اللهم إني هؤلاء أهل بيت وخاصتي وحامتي لحمهم لحمي ودمهم دمي يؤلمني ما يؤلمهم ويحزنني ما يحزنهم أنا حرب لمن حاربهم وسلم لمن سالمهم وعدو لمن عداهم ومحب لمن أحبهم إنهم مني وأنا منهم فاجعل صلواتك وبركاتك ورحمتك وغفرانك ورضوانك عليها وعليهم وعذب عنهم الرجس وطهرهم تطهيرا اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد فقال الله عز وجل يا ملائكتي ويا سكان السماوات إني ما خلقت السماء مبنية ولا أرضا مدهية ولا قمرا منيرا ولا شمسا مضية ولا فلكا يدور ولا بحرا يجري ولا فوقا يسري إلا في محبة هؤلاء الخمسة الذين هم تحت الكساء اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد وقال أمين جبريل يا ربي من تحت الكساء قال عز وجل هم عن بيت النبوة ومعدن الرسالة فاطمة وأبوها وبالها وبنوها اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد وقال جبريل يا رب يتأذن لي أن أهبط إلى الأرض ليكون معهم سادسا فقال الله نعم قد أذنت لك فهبط الأمين جبريل وقال السلام عليك يا رسول الله العلي الأعلى يقرأك السلام ويخصك بالتحية والإكرام ويقول لك وعزتي وجلال إني ما خلقت السماء ممنية ولا أرضا مدهية ولا أرضا مدهية ولا قمرا منيرا ولا شمسا مضيئة ولا فلكا يدور ولا بحرا يجري ولا فوقا يسري إلا لأجلكم ومحبتكم وقد أذن لي أن أدخل معكم فألتأذن لي يا رسول الله فقال رسول الله وعليك السلام يا أمين وحي الله إنه نعم قد أذنت لك فدخل جبريل معنا تحت الكساء اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد فقال لأبي إن الله قد أوحى إليكم يقول إنما يريد الله ليذهب عنكم الرجس أهل البيت ويطهركم تطهيرا اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد فقال علي لأبي يا رسول الله أخبرني من مال جلوسنا هذا تحت الكساء من فضل عند الله فقال النبي والذي بعثني بلك نبيا واصطفاني برسالة نجيا ما ذكر خبرنا هذا في مغفر من محافل أهل الأرض وفيه جمع من شيتنا مهمين إلا ونزلت عليهم الرحمة وخفت بهم الملائكة واستغفرت لهم إلى يتفرقوا فقال علي إذن الله يفوزنا فاز شيتنا ورب الكعبة اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد فقال النبي ثانيا يا علي والذي بعثني بلك نبيا واصطفاني برسالة نجيا ما ذكر خبرنا هذا في محفل من محافل أهل الأرض وفيه جمع من شيتنا محبين وفيه مهموم إلا فرج الله همه مهموم إلا وكشف الله همه ولا طالب حاجة إلا وكز الله حاجته فقال علي إذن الله يفوزنا وسويدنا وكذلك شيتنا فازوا وسويدوا في الدنيا والآخرة ورب الكعبة اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد سورة مباركة الفاتحة
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. Ahsan. Thank you so much, Uncle Murtaza. We'll now start the majlis for the program for the wiladat of Imam Muhammad Baqir. And inshallah, we'll all benefit from this majlis. Tonight's majlis is by Sayyid Shabir Kirmani from Masjid Al-Hayy in Orlando. Here we go.
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان اللعين الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. فوض أمري إلى الله إن الله بصير بالعباد ولا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله العلي العظيم. حسبنا الله ونعم الوكيل ونعم المولى ونعم النصير. والصلاة والسلام والتحية والإكرام على الرسول المسدد المصطفى الأمجد المحمود الأحمد الذي سمي في السماء بأحمد وفي الأرض بأبي القاسم محمد. اللهم صل على محمد وعلى محمد وسلم. وعلى أهل بيت الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين المظلومين المنتجبين الذين أذهب الله عنهم الرجس وطهرهم تطهيرا. اللهم صل على محمد. وقل رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقه قولي. أما بعد، قال الله تبارك وتعالى في كتاب الكريم: بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. إنما يخشى الله من عباده العلماء. صدق الله العلي العظيم. زينوا مجالسكم بالصلوات على محمد وآل محمد. اللهم صل على محمد. My respected elders, brothers and sisters, youngsters in Islam and Iman here in Florida, across the globe, wherever you're hearing my voice, Salamun alaikum jami'an wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Question: what does it mean to split knowledge? We're told there's a moment in time an elderly man is sitting in the vicinity of the mosque, and at that moment in time, he has lost his eyesight due to old age, and he is seeing people who are passing by, And at one moment in time, when one individual seems to pass by, he asks this individual, please stay there for a moment. Can you please wait for a moment? And at that point in time, he says, sure. He says, can you come closer? He comes closer to the man. Now, he's lost his sight, so the other perceptions he has to use to sense what is going on. But he says, you seem to sound like him. You seem to walk like him in terms of the sound. You seem to have every aspect of it. What's your name? Oh, young man, the elderly man says to the man in front of me. He says, my name is Muhammad. He says, son of who? He says, son of Ali. He says, son of who? Son of Hussein. He says, son of who? Son of Ali. At that point in time, he said, this is the moment I've been waiting for. This is the moment that I've been awaiting for so many years. And he says, I convey unto you the salams of Rasulullah, O Muhammad al-Baqir. At that moment in time, this was Jabir ibn Abdullah al-Ansari, who had become elderly and had lost his sight, and he had gone through these eras of all the different companions, and he came forward and he used to tell other companions that when they would say, Jabir, you've gotten very old, you'll perhaps not live very long. He would say, no, I have some ways to go until the one who's born, who I have to give my salams to, Rasulullah has told me that's what's going to happen. So this was that individual by the name of Imam al-Baqir, who you and I are here to commemorate and remember and revive that blessed memory. What are some of the elements that we learn from the life of this Imam that we can actually apply to our world today? And how is it perhaps that we may not have understood, or we need to do a little bit more investigation to understand what were the contributions of the Muslim world to our modern world? And beyond that, what was Islam's vision for people to actually flourish and for society to flourish? So the first thing I want to look at is, who is this Imam? Who is Imam al-Baqir? What does Baqir mean? When was he born? What can we learn from this? Number one. Number two, was the Imam only teaching Islamic studies? Was he only teaching Quran? Was he only teaching Hadith? Or was there some other things that he was teaching? And if he was teaching some other things, then number three, what were those things that he was teaching? At the fourth level, what does this have to do with the history of Islam? What does this have to do with the history of Europe? And what does this have to do with the history of the world, which we may have forgotten or may not have fully understood? And finally, what is the take-home message for you and I as followers of the Ahlul Bayt living in the 21st century in terms of what we should be doing for the future trajectory of our community based on what we learned from the life of Imam al-Baqir? This is our agenda for the brief moments that we are together. Wherever you are, here in Florida, across the globe, from the bottom of your heart, send a salawat on Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. At the first level, this blessed Imam was born in the 57th year AH, 57 AH, 57 years after Hijrah, which would be 4 years, or just under 4 years, before the tragedy of Karbala, which happened in the 61st AH, 61 AH. But here's how you remember this. One of the easy ways to remember it is the Imam was born in 57 AH. He is the 5th Imam, and he is the 7th Ma'soom. By that, you can remember it as the mnemonic 57. But there's another thing to remember also. He also lived in this world for 57 years. So if you do your math, 57 plus 57, you get 114, the number of surahs that are in the Holy Quran. And so you can remember this through that mnemonic or memory tool, number one. Number two, what does Baqir mean? Baqir, according to ulama, means to split. So Baqir is not complete without one saying Baqirul Ulum in the true sense. That's the complete title. The one who splits knowledge open. What does that mean? You see, let me give you an example so that we can understand this thoroughly. That is this. If you go back today to our world, we have many different subjects that we study in our world. And the one thing that I want to highlight today is lessons from the life of Imam al-Baqir, focusing on a few things that the Imam can help us understand, such as economics, such as sociology, such as science, and what was the contribution therein of Muslims and Islam and the Muslim world. And so, before, if you went back, they didn't have this delineation of biology, chemistry, mathematics, you go down the list. It was just science. And if you went back even further, about 400 years in Europe, what was the name of science? They didn't even call it science. The name was natural philosophy. And the idea was, this was the branch of philosophy that deals with nature. Because before that even, there was only one subject, philosophy. But as specialization increased and people said that there's a lot of stuff here, we can't just call this general philosophy, we need to branch it out. That's exactly what Imam Baqir was doing. When people would ask him questions, And they in their mind only had one concept of what is, for example, fiqh. They would say jurisprudence. What is Islam? Okay. What aspect of Islam? Jurisprudence. Okay. How do you determine laws of jurisprudence, of fiqh? So this idea of usul al-fiqh, the principles of jurisprudence. How do you deduce the laws? Is there a system that you follow? This is what the Imam was saying. But he wasn't just doing this in the Islamic space, by the way. We have made this segregation of Islamic knowledge versus un-Islamic knowledge. This same Imam Baqir tells us that knowledge is only of two types, either qurbatan ilallah or not. That is, either knowledge takes you closer to Allah or not. This was the ethos of Islam. Islam was contributing to the world at such a level that sometimes you and I forget and we don't even realize. I'll give you an example. The same individual that I mentioned in the Jummah khutbah, for those of you who recall and those of you may have heard online, Benedict Kohler, he's a historian, focusing particularly on business history. And he said, I was looking into the history of waqf endowments. He said that where did this trust come from? You know, today in our world, you have trust funds and these concepts of trusts. He said, I want to know where it comes from. So he said, then I started reading and studying about the waqf notion. He said, if you ask people about where did waqf come from, Muslims themselves, Benedict Kohler says, Muslims themselves will say a waqf endowment came from the Ottoman Empire 200 years ago. And they say they copied the West in the concept of a trust. And he said that I didn't buy that. I went and dug a little deeper. Benedict Kohler is saying, I began to research this and I began to study. And he said, I actually found that waqf was established in the Muslim world well before that. Well before Ottomans and well before Europe. He says, when? Benedict Kohler. He said, I found that the first waqf was established after Khaybar. He said this, after the Battle of Khaybar. When the Muslims conquered Khaybar, they got land as part of that conquest. When Amir al-Mu'mineen conquers Khaybar, they had land. This was the first time. Now, land was an asset which actually generated capital, which generated flow of funds. It was an asset which generated funds for the community. And so what Kohler says is Muhammad then gave this, he distributed this land amongst companions and people who were there. And one of the companions said, what do I do with this money? Like, what do I do with this land? I don't need all of this money and land. I have enough. So he says, established an endowment, and established a trust, which he says was the first waqf fund. I'll give you an example. Recall I mentioned to you some months ago in this narration of Imam Amir al-Mu'mineen, which his wilada is coming up soon. But I recall and I remind you, Imam Ali, for 25 years, we say, when his right was usurped, he was just sitting at home. Was he really just sitting at home? The reality of the matter is we don't highlight what was going on during that time. One of the things that Imam Ali was doing at that time, which we now use the term property development. We wouldn't think of it that way. He was doing land development. So what would he do? During that period, Imam Ali would take a sack on his back and he would go towards the outskirts of the city. And they would say, Ya Ali, where are you going? What do you got in your bag? He says, date palms, inshallah. Tell me what? Date palms on your back? How? There were seeds at the time. So Imam Ali would go out there and plant these seeds eventually. And you would need to give water, and all of these things were necessary, number one. Number two, he would also go and dig to find water. As you know, at that time, water was the oil of the time. It was like a resource that if you struck water in the middle of a desert, you struck it rich. Recall that when the water sprung out from Zamzam, that was as if Nabi Ibrahim and Ismail, his family, Bibi Hajara, they had struck oil, so to speak. That's why people came and took over the well of Zamzam later on. Anyways, coming back to this, Amir al-Mu'mineen, one day he goes to the outskirts of town during the same era and period. When he goes to the outskirts of town, the narrations say, Imam Ali takes a shovel and he begins to dig and strike the ground. One day, striking very heavily. When he's striking very heavily, the people begin to talk. Yeah, this is Ali, he's going after dunya. This Ali is going after this world. These people had differentiated in their mind. I wish if people had given an opportunity to Imam Ali to rule for a bit longer, this world perhaps would not have the oppression that we have. Nonetheless, he strikes the ground 1 day, 2 day, 3 day. Fateh Khaybar striking. The first day, 1 time, 2 time, 3 time, people are saying Ali is going after dunya. Nothing happens. So then he goes back home. Now remember, in Islam, on us is to do a righteous struggle for rizq, for sustenance. Whether we get the result is to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, because Allah has promised that He's going to sustain us. There's two types of rizq. One that will find us, whether we like it or not, and one that we have to go after. So we have to do our work. Now come back to this. So the second day, Imam Ali comes and he strikes in the middle of this desert on the outskirts of Medina. People are looking, Ali's going after dunya. 1 strike, 2 strike, 3 strike. And he's striking, sweating profusely. And eventually he says, nothing emerges from that. The third day, again people are saying, Ali's going after dunya. He wants to become a millionaire. He wants to become the richest person in town. Amir al-Mu'minin strikes once, twice, 3 times. Nothing's happening. He then gets out of this hole, has become a crater in the ground. Then he gets out. Then he comes back in. He wipes the sweat off his forehead, goes back in, and then he strikes with a Khaybari strike. And then water gushes out from the ground. When water gushes out from the ground, the people look and they say, Ali's hit it big. Ali's a millionaire, billionaire, whatever you want to call it of the time, because he has struck gold. If that time, water you have access to water, you control the water, so everyone else needs water around you. For irrigation, for canals, for whatever they need it, they need water. You can't survive. So the person who's the gatekeeper of this is Amir al-Mu'minin. As soon as he struck water, Amir al-Mu'minin said, bring me a paper and pen. He said, bring a paper and pen. Amir al-Mu'minin took his paper and pen, and he began to write. Remember, Amir al-Mu'minin is the same one who wrote the peace treaty for Rasulullah. He used to write for Rasulullah. Remember, there were not very many people who wrote in Arabia at that time when Islam came. So Amir al-Mu'minin writes down, he says, what? He says, I am endowing this water well. I am endowing this water spring for the following. Who am I endowing it for? Number 1, I'm endowing it for the poor of the society. Use the funds that are raised here to help the poor, number 1. Number 2, use the funds from here to look after those people who have medical bills, the ill ones amongst you. Use the funds here for them. Number 3, use the funds from this well in order to look after the wayfarers, you know, the travelers, the people who are traveling and they may have lost the funds, they're out of funds, they need to get back home. Use the funds to help them. Number 4, use the funds from here to help young people get married. Amir al-Mu'minin said this when? He said, use the funds here to help young people who aren't able to get married, help them get married. Number 5, Amir al-Mu'minin says, use the excess funds for the development of this space. Waqf at that time. Now here's the kicker. Benedict Kohler argues that the narrative today in the West is that people say that Muslims got the Waqf concept from Europeans, where he says the reality to me seems clear that it's clear that the Europeans...
Now here's the kicker. Benedict Kohler argues...
And he gives the evidence therein. In fact, he said that the concept is what was being modeled there, because a waqf is a financial instrument as well as a legal instrument. You know what's amazing when I've been reading Benedict Kohler's work? Now I understand why Thomas Jefferson had a Quran, not 1 but 2 copies. Because the people at that time understood that in law, in business, and in finance, the Muslim world, when we called the Dark Ages, not my words, Bertrand Russell said, we call the Middle Ages the Dark Ages. He said, that's not right. Why? Because the Dark Ages were only dark in Europe. So China was not in the Dark Ages. The Middle East was not in the Dark Ages. So why are we giving the whole world Dark Ages when only we were in the Dark Ages? And so the law, the civic law, business law, commerce law was well ahead. Another point from Benedict Kohler himself. Fibonacci. They say that algebra and mathematics in the popular conscience, people say, it came from Italy during this Renaissance. And Fibonacci is a person who's given a lot of credit for this. But he said, I looked at the history of Fibonacci. And Fibonacci, although he was Italian, where did he grow up? He said he grew up in Algeria, in a Muslim society, which had access to those Arabic books that were not accessible in other places. But what led to the graph declining of Muslims? There's a few things. One is when rulers began to corrupt the scholarship and say, we don't want the general populations to be educated. If they become educated, then we struggle. You ever heard of that saying, knowledge is power? Knowledge is at least potential power, to say the least. Maybe having knowledge, if you don't act on it, doesn't give you as much benefit. But actionable knowledge is what controls our world. Number 1. Number 2, there are verses after verses. Some ulama estimate that 600, 700, or 800 verses of the Quran, either explicitly or implicitly, either directly or indirectly of the Quran, have to deal with tafakkur and tadabbur, reflection and contemplation. And so Muslims, when they were studying science, when they were studying economics, when they were studying whatever domain, they saw that as an act of worship, the way the Quran guided them to. But what happens is, sometimes we hear some things and then we adopt them. I was just mentioning this morning in Fajr, if you recall, this narrative that it was Allah's will, Allah's qada and qadar. Do you know that this notion, yes, Allah's will is Allah's will, but Allah's will is different from Allah's knowledge. People would then say that God forbid, hasha lillah, what happened in Karbala was the will of Allah, was it? It was in the domain of knowledge of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He knew it was going to happen. But did Allah make the enemy do what they did to Imam Hussein? No. This happened during the Mamluk era. This narrative was created to help the people who are on the ground deal with the atrocities that the ruling party was doing on them. So now a person dies and people say it was Allah's will. It was in Allah's knowledge, but that person, Allah gave that person free will also. So it may be someone has not good lifestyle habits. Maybe somebody was drinking and driving. Is that Allah's will? Did Allah will that to happen in that case? What about those narrations that say that sadaqah can postpone death up to 7 times? That if Malakul Maut is at your door and you give sadaqah, it can postpone your death up to 7 times. What about the concept of dua? You see, Allah has kept a complete balance. Yes, in certain circumstances you may do everything right and still you may not be able to save someone. But when we exonerate ourselves of responsibility, we trample on the ability that Allah gave us to be ashraf al-makhluqat. Yes, from the perspective of dealing with tragedy and difficulties, it's helpful perhaps. However, there's another side of it. So it's important to note these things. Coming back to this, what happened during the time of Imam al-Baqir? Imam al-Baqir is the one who not only was contributing from the space of Islamic sciences, he was actually teaching people about finance, science, teaching about chemistry, teaching about biology and other sciences. And so when I talk about economics as well as sociology and science today, I want you to keep that in mind. When we look at the future of our community, and look, I'm trying to lay a foundation that we build on for some time in the future. Everyone is saying coast to coast and actually globally now. I was speaking to people in Australia the other night and they're facing the same challenges that we're facing. People in the United Kingdom, same issues. It's just a few years here and there. Canada, same deal. The reality is, everyone's saying, same majalis, same milad, same zikr, same thing over and over. It's repetitive. How many times am I going to hear that same story? How many times am I going to hear the same thing? Well, one thing is there's a concept of barakah in the discussion itself. That's one. Number two, maybe we can also have this regular program, but also, if we're talking about Imam Baqir, we have a whole weekend talking about his contributions to the world and how he inspires us to become the most educated of our society. Example, during the time of Imam al-Baqir, there was a time where there was a big constraint in the Muslim world about minting currency. The minting of the currency, that is making currency, it was controlled by those who were in Byzantium, in the Roman Empire. And they were controlling the currency. Even today, currency control is a big thing. Even this, cryptocurrencies and the like have been a challenge for government, or governments see them as a challenge because if that intrudes on their currency strength, that's a challenge for them, right? Currency has been backed throughout history by armies. And so, leaving that to aside, the Muslim world had no solution of how do they mint these coins. They said, okay, we should have our own currency, but the problem here is, we don't know how to mint this currency. So what do we do? So they invited and they said they would do whatever they did. Whenever they didn't have an answer, they went to the Ahlul Bayt. So they called on Imam Baqir and they said, Yabna Rasulullah, look, here's the situation. We need to have our own currency and we need to mint money. But the reality of the matter is, we don't know how to. The same thing's going on today, by the way, right? One of the challenges that upsets certain countries, especially in the East, is that countries say, hold on, we work day, night, sweat, labor, perspire just to earn certain dollars in certain currency. And when you have a deficit, all you do is just press one button and you register up a bunch of numbers and you print money? Who gave you that right? And that's what's causing a lot of this rift that's going on that you're seeing politically in our world. The apparent is never the apparent. What's going on is there's the backstory. Anyways, so Imam said, don't worry, I will explain to you how to mint currency. I will show you how you can actually create your own currency. And when he showed them, they were able to do it. And he said, write on this, La ilaha illallah Muhammad Rasulullah. When that happened, it was the first time they were able to mint coinage and currency in the Muslim world. So the Imam was solving the financial dilemmas of the time and era. What about us in our society? Have we showed the world what Islam's concept of capitalism or economic development was? It's a very rich concept. But are we just absorbing, or are we contributing and saying, hey, maybe you can have your cake and eat it too. Maybe you can have capital and assets and resources, but maybe you also don't have to have an environment of only haves and have-nots. Maybe you can balance it out somehow. This is what Islam's ethos was. Letter of the law and spirit of the law. Another example. A man says, I wanted to advise Muhammad al-Baqir. He said, but he advised me. So what do you mean? What do you mean? He said, I was in the middle, I was going by the city and I was going by the outskirts, and I saw an elderly man who was working, perspiring in the field and doing agriculture. And he had a farm seemingly. He was working in the fields. And he had two servants seemingly, or two people who worked with him, who he was using to support him to get up. And he said, I went closer and I realized this was Muhammad al-Baqir, Muhammad ibn Ali. And so he says to himself, I wish to advise him, but he advised me. So what did you wish to advise him? He said, I wished, and I went to him and I said to him, what I wanted to say, I said to him. I said, oh Muhammad ibn Ali, oh Muhammad al-Baqir, you are in this state right now and you are going after the dunya. What if Malakul Maut takes your life right now? What if the angel of death takes your life right now? So the Imam, the narration says, he looked up and he supported himself with the two people, and he stood up and he said, if I meet my Lord in this state, I will have died in a state of ibadah. I will have died in a state of worship. What was the Imam saying there? That actually working, doing work with your own hands and actually earning income is a form of worship? This is the challenge that we're facing in our world. We have compartmentalized worship to just be sitting and praying. That's not the Islamic concept. Islam's concept was that even, do you know these narrations? That, for example, there are 70, this is from Rasulullah, 70 parts of worship. The highest of them is to seek a halal rizq, halal sustenance. By the way, you know what Kohler said? Benedict Kohler, the same guy. He said, I looked up, where risk comes from? Because he's a banker. Historically, he was a banker in private industry, then he became a historian. And he said, I was looking up the history of the word risk. Risk management, R-I-S-K, risk managers, big industry. Our world runs on it. He said, I went to it and they said the origin of risk, the word risk is Italian. But then when I went to the Italian, I found that they don't know where it came from in Italian. Where did the word risk come from? It's not a European word. So he said that then my Arab friends told me there's a word in Arabic called rizq. And he said that if I knew Arabic, that is the paper I would write tomorrow. The origin of the word risk and risk management. Because our world, we study risk management, but we have no idea where the origin of the word risk comes from. And he says, I would bet my money that it comes from the Arabic word rizq. But we sometimes forget. You know how sometimes you go to the market and people say, Mama, Baba, I got ghee. And you'll be like, they'll be like, I've been giving you this since you were a child. Like, what are you talking about? What's the deal? He said, no, I got it from like Costco or Target or Walmart. This ghee is really good for your health. And that's kind of what's been happening over the last few centuries, when Muslims have not understood what is the contribution historically that has been given to the world and lost and sold back to us without us even understanding. But remember, and I always repeat this, a nation, a civilization, a community that's always looking in the rearview mirror cannot do what? You can't look ahead. You have to look ahead. And it's on this generation to cultivate an environment where we learn from the Ahlul Bayt and aspire to one thing: excellence. This is what we learn from Imam Baqir. Allow me to explain. Hisham ibn Hakam is ruling over the Muslim world. When Hisham ibn Hakam is ruling over the Muslim world, he said, let's make fun of Baqir. Let's make fun of Muhammad al-Baqir. Do you know how he wanted to make fun of Imam Baqir? He said, this guy's a knowledgeable person. He reads all the time. He's learned and he teaches. He's a nerd. Astaghfirullah, in my language, in our language. He's somebody who's just a book smart guy. What does he know about our day and our age and what it means to be, cool and stylish and all that? He said, let's do something. He said, what do you want to do? He said, let's have an archery competition. Today we have sports and athletics and things of that nature. That was one of the sports of the day. As you know, Rasulullah says to emphasize these things. So he says, let's have an archery competition and we'll ask him to try to shoot a bow and arrow. And we'll have a good laugh when he's not able to do it. So at that point in time, they have the whole gathering set. They have the archery set. They have the bows and arrows set, the bullseye set, everything set. And then, the king and all the royalty, they're shooting and they're all shooting. They have nothing else to do. They've been practicing. They're doing pretty decent. So Imam Baqir is sitting there also. They say, Ya Ibn Rasulullah, why don't you join us? Why don't you also shoot a few arrows with us? He said, no, I think I'm okay. He said, no, we insist. So Imam comes and said, okay. So he took the bow and arrow, and they think they're going to get their laugh at that point in time. So the Imam takes the bow and arrow, and he takes aim for the bullseye. First arrow he lets go, it pierces the bullseye. They're in shock. Like beginner's luck. He said, try another one. He said, you sure? He said, yeah. So he took another one, took aim, Imam al-Baqir, he lets go, pierces the second one. Pierces the first one, the second arrow pierces the first arrow. Straight right on the bullseye. I said, wow. One more. They give him a third arrow. Imam looked at it, fine. Took aim, bullseye again. They said, okay, that's enough. We don't want to embarrass ourselves. They said, fine. At that point in time, what you understood from that was he recalled, and Rasulullah had said, make sure you teach your children 3 things. Swimming, horse riding, and archery. And the Imam didn't, it wasn't just lip service for the Ahlul Bayt, they actually did it. By the way, these were the sports of the time, if you will. These are the things that drew people to excellence. What do we learn from this? Imam was contributing in science, in sociology, in economics. What do I mean by sociology? Do you know what the biggest book, Mark Zuckerberg, he tells his staff in his book club, read this book. One of the months he says, read this book. It's called Muqaddimah by Ibn Khaldun. So what, you're telling us to read a book that's like 1,000 years old by an Arab guy? We don't even know how to pronounce his name? So yeah. So why? Because we say sociology started 200 years ago with Weber and people of that nature, but this guy was the first sociologist. This guy, Khaldun, was the first historian. Meaning what? Before Ibn Khaldun, everyone used to say, this is what happened in history. But Khaldun is the first person in history who, they say, looked at the patterns of history. Remember what Imam Ali said to his son in the letter 31 Nahj al-Balagha? He says, my son, I read the pages of history up until it was as if I had walked amongst the ruins of past civilization, and I understood what brought them good and what brought them harm. What does Ray Dalio do? What do the biggest bankers and investors of our world do today? What's Ray Dalio's biggest book right now? It's The Changing Order of the World. What did he do? He went and looked at the empires. He looked at the empires before our empires. He said, there's the US. Before them was the United Kingdom, the superpower in the hegemony of the world. He said, before them was the Dutch. And before the Dutch was the Ottomans. The Dutch are the ones who created the system of stocks and shares. And they were economic powers of the time. And he said, people don't study these patterns, but if you study what happened to the Dutch, if you study Dutch, as you know, New York used to be called New Amsterdam, the influence of the Dutch there, Netherlands. The Dutch, the British, the US, you can mark all those patterns that happen throughout times. And if you understand those patterns, you can understand what's about to happen in the future of society. But what happens is we don't study these patterns. So what do we need to do for the future of our communities? We need to highlight how Imam Baqir, as an example, inspires us to learn about the world, to learn about where is the world going in terms of AI, artificial intelligence, in terms of blockchain technology, in terms of IoT, in terms of 5G, in terms of you name it, whatever, quantum computing, and how that's going to change our world for the better. You know, there's many prospects of benefit in medicine today that are a blessing. Life expectancies are expected to go higher. There's many positive fronts because of the development of technology. But we sometimes don't explicitly make it clear for our next generation that, look, if you find a cure to cancer, if you find a cure to this and that and the other, that's also a form of worship. Alleviating suffering is a form of worship. Why else did Imam Ali go in the middle of the night with his face covered with the hood on, and he would have food on his back and distribute it to alleviate suffering in the world so that people weren't suffering in this way? This is the principle that we've lost. So Imam Baqir teaches us excellence. Whatever you aspire to in life, Try to be the best and the top at that. How can our mosques, our masajids, as I conclude right here, how can they play a vital role in this? This is how. By using tests, by using seminars, by using workshops to help young people in their early part of their life identify their strengths and identify where is those spaces and those areas that if they endeavor in them, perhaps they will be world class. This includes being the best soccer player, basketball player, XYZ of your time. Believe me, it's not limited to just certain fields. I know certain communities that I go and lecture in, the farthest they can see is become a physician. Physician's a very noble field. But if someone's not going to be the best physician, and they could perhaps be the next greatest entrepreneur, maybe that's better for them. Or if maybe somebody's going to be the greatest athlete in history, maybe that's better for them. Do you know how much tabligh you can do by being a good athlete? Hakim Olajuwon, if some of you remember, he used to fast during Shahr Ramadan. And people said, who is this guy who's destroying all the competition although he's fasting? And he used to have an oxygen mask while he was on the court on the side, practicing fasting during Shahr Ramadan. Who are these people? Mahmoud Abdul Rauf and others. Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. These things change the paradigm. And we have tremendous talent across our community. But what we learned from Imam Baqir is simply this, and I'll conclude here. Do not be unidimensional. You need to be multidimensional. Charlie Munger says, I tell people learn as much as you can about as many subjects. Teach your children how to fly a plane. Now, I'm giving you the examples of Munger and Buffett and Dalio, but our imams were saying this years ago. We should have implemented it from them, and hopefully we do. What did Karen Armstrong say? When will Islam, everyone asked her, when will Islam go back to the golden age? Algebra, Arabic word. Alchemy, Arabic word. Algorithm, Arabic word. When will you go back to that era? She says, look, it will not happen until you send your top minds to mullah school. That's it. Chapter closed. Until we revive that spirit, we will suffer, and we are suffering. I have no proud doubt that people will become educated, wealthy, affluent, no doubt. But they'll say Islam's not keeping up, when in reality, the narrative in Islam was flipped, that you should be keeping up with Islam. Islam was looking way ahead. And we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that we learn from the life of Imam al-Baqir in order to actually pursue excellence in our lives, to become the best in terms of health, wealth, happiness, to become role models that people are proud of, that the Imam himself would be proud of as to have us as his followers. We hope that we are able to bring out and solve the problems of our world by inspiration of Imam al-Baqir, and we hope that inshallah Allah hastens the reappearance of the Imam of our time and allows us to be amongst his companions when he returns. And final request to please recite the Surah Al-Fatiha for your marhameen, for our marhameen, for all the marhameen of those who make these programs possible, the sponsors marhameen, and especially for those who don't have anyone to recite the Fatiha for them in this night. Surah Al-Mubarak Al-Fatiha ma'as salawat. Allahumma salli.
أفضل السلام والسلام عليك يا رسول الله محمد وآل محمد صلوات صلوا على محمد Allah एक है पंजतन पांच है इमाम 12 है मासूम 14 है अल्लाह एक है पंजतन 5 है इमाम 12 है मासूम 14 है पहले इमाम अली है लक़ब जिनका मुर्तज़ा पहले इमाम अली है लक़ब जिनका मुर्तज़ा और दूसरे हसन है लक़ब जिनका मुज्तबा और तीसरे हुसैन शहनशाह है करबला اور تیسرے حسین شہنشاہ کربلا ماں فاطمہ ہے جن کی لقب جن کا سیدہ اللہ ایک ہے پنجتن پانچ ہے امام 12 ہے معصوم 14 ہے اللہ ایک ہے پنجتن پانچ ہے امام 12 ہے معصوم 14 ہے چھوٹے امام علی ہے لقب زین العابدین کہتے ہیں جن کو سید سجاد مومنین اور ایک لقب ہے عابد بیمار و دل حزین سجدوں سے جن کے اب بھی منور ہے زمین اللہ ایک ہے پنجتن پانچ ہے امام 12 ہے معصوم 14 ہے اللہ ایک ہے پنجتن پانچ ہے امام 12 ہے معصوم 14 ہے And for our 5th Imam for tonight, inshallah. ہے پانچویں امام محمد ہے جن کا نام باقر لقب سے جانتے ہیں ان کو خاص و عام ہے علم میں پانچویں آقا کا بھی غلام ان کو سلام کرتے ہیں جبریل صبح و شام اللہ ایک ہے پنجتن پانچ ہے امام 12 ہے معصوم 14 ہے اللہ ایک ہے پنجتن پانچ ہے امام 12 ہے معصوم 14 ہے Let's remember our 12th Imam, our Imam of our time, inshallah. اور 12ویں امام زمانے کے تاجدار اور 12ویں امام زمانے کے تاجدار جو اپنے نام سے ہے پیمبر کی یادگار ایک وصف میں جو وصف خدا سے ہم کنار پردے میں ہے امام تو پردے میں کردگار اللہ ایک ہے پنجتن پانچ ہے امام 12 ہے معصوم 14 ہے اللہ ایک ہے محمد وآل محمد صلوات اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد سورة المباركة الفاتحة اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد وعجل فرجهم. Once again, on behalf of the entire community, congratulations and felicitations go out to everybody on the birth of our 5th Imam, Imam Muhammad Baqir alayhi salam. May Allah give us the opportunity to visit our Imams. May Allah give us the opportunity to do the ziyarah. And inshallah, may He give us the opportunity to once again celebrate his birth in the upcoming years. Let's take this opportunity to remember those that are no longer with us this year, that were here with us last year, and all those from our families that are no longer here. Let's remember them with Surah Al-Mubarakah Al-Fatiha. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. A couple of announcements to make. Inshallah, our next program will be on this coming Tuesday. So as I announced at the beginning of the program, there has been confirmed sightings of the moon. And therefore tonight is indeed the first night of Rajab. Please do remember all of us in your amals and your du'as. And that means on Tuesday night, and the program will be going out first thing tomorrow morning. But on Tuesday night, inshallah, we will be commemorating the wafat of our 10th Imam, Imam Ali al-Naqi alayhi salam. And the program will begin at 7:30 as well. So we ask and we urge you please to join the program and to participate in the program as well. So please plan on being here on Tuesday at 7:30, inshallah. Additionally, I want to remind everybody, like Brother Khalil had announced at the masjid the other day, the Imamara the other day, the Shia Muslim Council program that's coming up on celebrating Imam Ali. And so we hope that everybody, if you have not purchased your ticket yet, the good news is that the event is on February 12th. It's coming up, and the good news is that the discounted tickets have been extended to the 25th. So the 25th of this month of January, which is in a couple of days, you can still purchase the discounted tickets for this program. Also, the children's tickets, I believe it's 12 and under, have been reduced to $35. So it's less than half of the full price. So hopefully, inshallah, everybody can participate. Once again, the event to remember Imam Ali Inspires is on February 12th at the Sheraton in Anaheim. And we urge everybody to please participate and support the program, inshallah. I'd like to end the program right now with let's remember those that are in need, those that are suffering from ailments, those that could need the dua with 5 times dua ma yujibu. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Amma yujibu المضطر إذا دعاه ويكشف السوء أما يجيب 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 المضطر إذا دعاه ويكشف السوء اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد وعجل فرجهم. And I'll ask Uncle Murtaza to just help us adjourn this program tonight with the recitation of the ziyarah, inshallah. Uncle Murtaza, if you're there.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم السلام عليك يا أبا عبد الله السلام عليك يا ابن رسول الله السلام عليك يا خليفة الكبرى السلام عليك يا أمير المؤمنين السلام عليك يا فاطمة الزهراء سيدة نساء العالمين السلام على الحسين وعلى علي بن الحسين وعلى أولاد الحسين وعلى أصحاب الحسين جميعا ورحمة الله وبركاته السلام عليك يا مولا ابن مولا السلام عليك يا خليل الله السلطان بن حسن الله بن موسى الرضا شفيعنا شفيع والدينا من جزاي ورحمة الله وبركاته السلام عليك صاحب الزمان الأمان الأمان السلام عليك يا خليفة الرحمن السلام عليك شريف القرآن السلام عليك كعبة الإيمان السلام عليك إمامنا وإمام النسوة أجل الله فرجه وسهل الله تعالى معرجه وظهور الأرض ورحمة الله وبركاته
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد بسم الله
اللهم صل على الحسن صلواتك عليه وعلى آبائه في هذه الساعة وفي كل ساعة وليا وحافظا وقائدا وناصرا ودليلا وعينا حتى تسكنه أرضك طوعا وتطيعه فيها طويلا برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين.
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد وعجل فرجهم. Thank you, everybody. Inshallah, we'll see you on Tuesday night, inshallah, at 7:30 for the Shahadat